Hi, this is Eileen Monreale with Friends of Olmsted-Beil House Board, and we are thrilled to be here at 4485 Highland Boulevard, Staten Island, New York, also known as Kaasmann House. This is a Friends of Olmsted-Beil House project, which was really coordinated and created by Patricia Salmon, who's also on our board. She developed a lot of questions because we're all very interested to learn more about this house, and Tina Kaasmann, who is also on our board, and she grew up in the house, and we want to learn more about that. So today we have some questions, and I'm going to ask the first 7 questions. Board member Jack Bolenbach will ask the next 7. Paula Tramontano, our also board member, will ask the following 7, and then we'll finish up with Patricia Salmon also asking the last 7 or 8 questions. So we appreciate, Tina, that you're willing to do this, and we're really looking forward to hearing more of the history of your life and this house.
I hope I know the answers.
Well, there's no wrong answers.
Oh, no wrong answers.
And you can always say, I'll get back to you.
Okay.
So, first question. When did your parents buy 4485 Highland Boulevard?
We came here in the early 1950s. And that's when we bought the place. Mm-hmm.
And early 50s.
Actually,
so you don't have an actual date?
Well, the beginning of 1950. I don't know whether it was January or February.
And who did they buy it from, and how much did it cost?
We bought this house from the Hales family. This was the last property that the Hales owned, except for their own house. This was an income property for them. And the price was $16,000, and it was a little over an acre of land.
Well, now that you've mentioned the Hale, and I know there's a huge history with that, why don't you in a nutshell tell us about the Hale history and what that is?
The Hales, John Hales actually bought the Olmsted property, and he was looking to make money. He was subdividing the properties, and he built about 16 houses, all the houses on the other side of Highland Boulevard between Hales Avenue and Arden Avenue, or Woods of Arden Avenue, on both sides of the boulevard. He built the ones on the water side first, and then he built ours. So there's about 16 houses that he built, and all but I think one of them are still here. And it was called the Seaside Estates Company. And they did very well. He didn't sell all the property, but he sold quite a bit of it and developed it himself.
And 15 of the 16 are still standing? Mm-hmm. And yours is of what style?
Ours is a Swiss chalet. Next to us is a Dutch colonial, and there's an English Tudor, and then there's a Spanish house, and all the houses had a decent sized piece of property. Ours had a little bit more. The story goes that he built this one for his mistress. We're not really sure about that, but
sounds
it makes
like
a good story, yeah.
And what was the lot size when they purchased?
This is about 1.5 acres.
It is today.
A little more than 1 acre, anyway.
And they added to it, so they purchased it in the 50s and then added to it.
Olmsted bought...
No, your family.
I mean, our family bought this property, which was something over 1 acre. And then later on, in 1963, we bought another piece of property adjacent to us that was 100 by 100. And I think we paid $10,000 for that.
Excellent. And now we'll move on to your parents. What are the names and dates of birth for your parents?
My parents were both born in 1914. My father was Edward, my mother was Christine. I'm also Christine, but my mother was Chris, so I became Tina. 1914. They were born. My father was born in Manhattan, and my mother's from Elizabeth, New Jersey.
And what was did you say your mother's maiden name?
My mother's maiden name was Vichys. It's Lithuanian.
And when did your parents pass?
My father died in 1999. He was 84. My mother died in 2015, and she was 100.
And where were your parents educated?
My parents both, they met in college. They went to the Savage School of Physical Education, which was in the city, kind of near Columbus Circle. So they both were gym teachers, and that's how they met and married a few years later.
And how old were they when they married?
My mother was 30, which was old in those days. And my father, same age.
And so for their professional lives, what did they do for their?
Well, they were both gym teachers. My father was also math and science. He taught at PS 41. And then he went on to go to Egbert Junior High, and he was assistant principal there. My mother taught phys ed in Elizabeth. She went home to her hometown. And then she taught women's physical fitness in the evening centers on Staten Island, and she taught on the playground. She was the dance specialist and the arts and crafts specialist. So she was like Martha Stewart before Martha Stewart was here.
And neither of them were born on Staten Island, correct?
No.
So how long were they residents of Staten Island?
Well, from like 1950 to the day they died. So they were here forever, long time.
So was this the first house they owned on Staten Island?
This is the only house.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I am going to hand it over to Jack.
Hi,
Thank you.
my name is Jack Bollenbach, and thanks for having us. Okay, my first question is, where are they buried?
They're buried at Resurrection Cemetery, just down the road, and my mother picked the plot out when it was just being started, and she decided that would be a good place because their plot is right on Highland Boulevard, and she said they wouldn't have to change their address because this is a Highland Boulevard address, this house. So when I drive by the boulevard, I can wave.
So same zip code, right? Okay. Can you give the names and dates of your brothers?
I have two brothers, one older, one younger. My older brother is Cap, and he was born in 1945. And my younger brother is Kenny, and he was born in 1954. We're all 5 years apart.
And where do they live?
Cappy lives in Jersey, Kenny lives upstate, New York.
Okay. And what was it like as a child growing up in Eltonville back in those days?
Magical. We had the woods behind us, the beach on the other side of us. We were either in the woods or down the beach, playing in the backyard. You didn't hear the roar of the traffic on Highland Boulevard because there was no traffic on Highland Boulevard. Our dog used to go down the beach all by himself for a swim and come back. We had this big property. Everybody here had a big property, and there were never any fences. Everybody here was friends. We were great friends with the Beales, who lived in the Olmsted house. My neighbor on the other side was Jimmy. He's my best buddy, and he had horses, 2 horses. There was only one of Jimmy, so I got to ride all the time. We rode through the woods on horses. We picked blackberries and strawberries in the woods. We went down the beach, camped out on the beach, swam down the beach. It was great.
Nobody locked their doors, right?
Nobody locked the doors. I mean, even before I left when I got married, I never locked my car. We'd leave the keys in the car.
So what was like, if you elaborate a little bit more, like a typical summer's day?
Summer's day, I put my bathing suit on when school got out, and I didn't take it off until school started again. I even remember sleeping in my bathing suit because we were all swimmers. My parents were swimmers and lifeguards, and we were all swimmers and lifeguards. So we always had a pool, and my neighbor had a pool. So we would jump in his pool and run across to our yard and swim in our pool, and in a bathing suit all the time, or down the beach swimming, playing in the woods. I remember raking the grass, putting it in big piles. I have moving pictures of that, and jumping in it. We had fruit trees here, picking apples, pears, plums, cherries. You name it, we had it. It was a wonderful life here. It still is a very special place.
But changed a lot.
But it certainly has changed. Not here, but around us has changed. We used to be able to walk out our backyard through the woods for a mile to Amboy Road, and there were no houses there. No houses at all. Just all woods. And we spent a lot of time in the woods. There were a lot of ponds in the back. I fell in most of them. And a lot of trees, and I fell out a lot of trees. I've got all scars to prove it. I know where I got every scar.
And then, in contrast to the wintertime, what was it like when you had like a heavy snow day and you didn't have school?
When we couldn't get to school, the first thing we had to do was shovel out the driveway, which was over 300 feet long. But we all did it, and we had a lot of fun. And then we built igloos, and we built caves, and so we had fun in the snow. And we had always had plenty of things to do. We always had animals, and so snow days were good. Yeah.
And the ponds froze over, so you skated.
Ponds, we had a brook running through the yard, and that would freeze, and we would skate on that. And then there were lots of ponds in the back. We'd skate on them. I fell through one of them. It was over my head. I remember my neighbor Jimmy had to pull me out, walking back home like this. But we never got yelled at for doing any of that, you know. And then we bought a rink, a little aluminum thing that we filled with water, and we'd skate. I have pictures of myself and Jimmy. He's holding me like we're skating pairs. We have, you know, like this, we're skating. We have lots of pictures, great stuff.
And great memories.
Yes, oh, great memories for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Schools. Tina, what schools did you attend? This is Paula from Montana. We're asking the next batch of questions.
Okay, Paul, as a school teacher, you want
I
to know
wanna
my,
know what
my
schools,
education. Well, we went to St. Clair's in Great Hills. Then I went to Countess Moore, the girls' Catholic high school. And then I decided I've had enough of the nuns, and I decided to leave Countess Moore. I never thought my parents would let me do it. They were kind of strict, and they were teachers, so they wanted us to get a good education. But I went to Tottenville my last year, and in retrospect, that was a mistake. I should have stayed at Countess Moore, but that's all right. Then I went to Wagner, because my brother went to Wagner, and I was there for a couple of years, and I didn't much want to be there, but I was on the basketball team, and that was nice. And then I went to Newark State College for a while, and then I went to community college. So I've got credits all over the place. But I never really knew what I wanted to be. My parents wanted me to be a gym teacher because they thought I'd be good at that. But I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just kept taking credits and credits and credits.
That's great. You spoke about some of your childhood friends. Were there any other childhood friends, and what kind of games did you play with your childhood friends?
We were mostly outside. We had a basketball court set up. We had badminton. We never had any grass in the backyard because we were always using it. We played baseball back there. Things like that. Yeah.
Okay. How and why did you become interested in history that you're so good at now?
Well, when I was little, the people that lived in the Olmsted house before the Beales bought it were the Cullens, and they were moving. And one day, Mrs. Cullen came over, and she handed me this book. And this is Lang & Davis, The History of Staten Island, Volume 2, which, if you're going to get any of this is a 5-volume set, and Volume 2 is probably the most interesting. And it has pictures of old buildings, and it's just I devoured it at a very young age. And the funny thing was, my brother had polio, and we used to go to Curtis High School. Curtis High School would turn the heat up in the pool on Friday nights, and they would have a swim for polio kids. Polio ran rampant in the 50s and late 40s. So he had gotten that. He was okay, really, but we got to go swimming with him. That's how we swam all winter and all summer long. So in this book are all these buildings, and when we would drive from Eltingville to St. George, we passed a lot of these buildings, or I would write them down, and I would come back and look them up in this book, and they were all in there. And I learned a lot about the North Shore just from these excursions on Friday nights to Curtis. And Curtis had, it was in Curtis High School, and Curtis had the lobby of Curtis High School has these WPA paintings on them on 3 sides. They're just magnificent. And when my father and the boys were changing up from the pool, I was already out changed, and I was sitting there looking at these WPA paintings, and I knew they were something really special. I would look for there was a little rabbit behind a bush, and I'd always look for him. And so I got interested in that. And the furniture in the lobby of Curtis at the time was befitting a castle. It was big, beautiful chairs and big, long tables. You thought you were in a castle. And now that furniture is all gone now, but the murals were still there. So I was immersed in, I got to see a lot of things that just maybe hit me at the right time that I liked. And I went back to Curtis a few years ago to look at the murals again, and they're still fabulous.
I'm glad
If you
they're
haven't
still
seen
there.
them, go see them. They'll knock your socks off. They're great.
So I've heard a story about Blossom the mare. Who was Blossom?
I got a picture. I hope you can see this. This is Blossom's tombstone. So Blossom, the house, the corner of Richmond Avenue and Highland Boulevard, from Highland Boulevard all the way back almost to Amboy Road, was the Roberts Horse Farm, and at the turn of the century and earlier. And Blossom was the favorite horse. And Blossom died in the 1880s, 35 years old. I think that's pretty old for a horse. And her owner made this tombstone for her, carved it. It says, "To our mare Blossom, a faithful servitor." And it was up in the woods where their corral was. And the horse farm then was gone. There was no trace of that anymore. But when we walked through the woods, we found this tombstone. So every once in a while, when we wanted to take a little hike, we'd go up to see Blossom's grave. And this picture is myself in a dress with a whistle around my neck so I don't get lost in the woods. And that's my older brother with me. And so that tombstone today is at Richmond Town. It's not on display, but it was saved by Mr. Beale and my father. They were developing the property behind us, and they felt that the kids had started throwing rocks at it, and it's sandstone, so it chips. So they knew they had to save it. So we went up. Mr. Beale had an old station wagon, and he'd pull it up. It was on a hill. It was right where PS 55 is now, right where their playground is. That's where Blossom's grave was. And we lowered it down on a rope, they did, and got it into Mr. Beale's station wagon, and he had it at his house for years and years and years. And then they gave it to Richmond Town. So someday I'm going to go see it again, because Blossom's grave is, there's a few people out there that remember it. It was, I don't know how my father even found it, but he always knew how to get us there. And I was only 5 years old in this picture, but I remember it fondly.
You mentioned the Beals, and your backyards kind of connect. So did growing up with the Beale family have any influence on your life or interests?
Mr. Beale, for sure. He was, if you found a baby bird, you could take it to him. Can you help this baby bird? And I tell this story before. He would look at that bird and he'd tell me, "Put it back where you found it because it's gonna die." And it did. So he knew a little bit about everything, and the wonderful things that he brought home from the museum that they were tossing out. I mean, he had a plaster cast of a dinosaur footprint. Who has that in their backyard? But they did. And we played around this plaster cast of a dinosaur footprint. So we learned a lot about nature from them. I didn't really even, I knew the house was old, the Olmsted house, but early on, I didn't even really know who Olmsted was. It kind of just creeped up on us later on.
And what made you decide to preserve this house, the Kaasmann house, by selling it to New York City Parks for inclusion into the Olmsted-Beil House Park?
I love this house. My dream was to always stay here for the rest of my life. And that was the plan until real estate started going crazy. And I knew I really couldn't afford it. And my mother, and I still have them, my mother saved all the letters that she got from real estate people. I would like to buy your house. I would like to buy your house. And she saved them. And so I knew that if we didn't do something, this was going to all be demolished. And in fact, when after my mother died, then we had to do something. That was 5 years ago. And so we had a real estate person come, and all they wanted to do was figure out how many houses they could get on this property. And they figured 7 houses. They would take down all the trees. They would put another road through. And most of these houses would have their backyards facing the Olmsted house. And I said, "You're going to take down all these trees?" And she said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "Do you know who planted these trees?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Olmsted. Who's Olmsted?" She knew nothing. I'm not going to tell you who she is, but she's very famous in the real estate community. But I knew that couldn't happen. So my mother and father had wanted it to become part of the Olmsted property. That was the plan for a long time. If I couldn't manage to live here, then, if I could manage to live here, then when I was gone, then it would become part of Olmsted. But so it's hopefully going to happen within the next 6 months or so. It's been a long journey. It's very difficult to hang on to a house and do repairs, pay taxes, and all that. But if this house was demolished and if this property was developed, that would just kill me. I couldn't let that happen. I've seen that happen on the island, and I didn't want to be part of that.
So even though there are so many delays with Parks buying the house, do you ever regret your decision to sell the house and the property to New York City Parks?
No, because it was absolutely the only way to save it. The only way to save it. I couldn't find a billionaire that, wanted to take on a money pit kind of thing, and I wouldn't have it developed. So, yep, we're good with it.
How do you see, envision 4485, the Kaasmann house, in 20 years?
I hope it's still in good repair. I hope it gets a paint job. It needs that. Hopefully it'll be kind of like what the Beale House has become at Conference House Park. Maybe we could have exhibits here. We could have studies here. We could do that hopefully at the Olmsted House also. But I think the Olmsted House will need a caretaker, and if they don't put the caretaker there, the caretaker could be here. So
I'm going to pass this along to Pat Salmon.
Okay, yeah, my name is Pat Salmon. I'm also on the board of directors of the Olmsted-Beil House, Friends of Olmsted-Beil House. And I have a few questions for Tina. What historic organizations have you served in the past, and in what capacity?
I was on the board of the Preservation League for a while. I was on the board of the Tottenville Historical Society. I was on the board of the Conference House. And I'm still involved in those organizations to some degree, just not on the board anymore. And now Olmsted-Beil, this is kind of where my heart has to be now. So,
What's your favorite way to spend a day on Staten Island right now?
I'm happy to be in this house, but I'm happy to be at the beach or somewhere in the woods. If I'm in the beach, down the beach, or in the woods, that's a good day.
And what about modern day Staten Island bothers you the most?
Well, of course, the overcrowding. I mean, when we moved here, as I said, it was woods everywhere. You know, this was the sticks. People didn't even want to live down here. And I always wondered, why not? This is beautiful down here. So it's the overdevelopment.